Scott, thank you so much for joining us. You've been such a generous kind of member of the New York startup ecosystem, and I thought you'd be the perfect person to come, speak with this group about just get into the weeds and the nuances of the process of starting companies. So maybe to kick it off, first of all, for people that don't know Scott, he's the Chief Strategy Officer of Adobe. He is also the co-founder of Behance and prolific angel investor. So maybe to kick it off, let's talk about the topic of like when to jump, right? Like you're in an amazing job, you're an incredibly smart person, and now you have to talk to your partner or your parents or whatever and just take the leap. Like when do you have conviction to do that?
Well, I think this is it's a process, I think, of two things, right? It's the conviction game, but then it's also the making it real game. And so let's talk about the conviction game for a second. First of all, conviction is highest typically when you know the least about the problem you're about to solve. So being naive is an amazing thing because you just start to have this like vision, of how everything will suddenly unfold in your favor, and it's an amazing thing. What I do think you have to do is sort of tease and test and pressure test that conviction with a lot of folks that you really respect, where you kind of share your vision and then you say tear it apart. And I always like to do this. I still do it when I have ideas, where I will just like kind of write up a synopsis and I will send it to people I respect, and I'll literally say like, tear this apart for me. And it's really fun. Usually you get a couple from very busy people. You'll get like one big question back or one hole that they see, and others you'll get some more detailed discussion or a follow-up. But I think that's a great way of starting to determine, if you get that back and you're deflated, let's regroup. If you get that back, and even though they disagree, you're like, but they're wrong, that actually gives you more conviction. So it has less to do with their reaction, and it has more to do with how you internalize it and whether you actually agree or not. Then the second piece is actually the making it real part. And this is always, this is a key part here, where when you start putting your own money in the game, like when I started Behance, I had a full-time job at Goldman Sachs, and I, that's another story. But I was always flirting with this idea of organizing the creative world, the attribution that was lacking in the creative industry, just how many middle people there were taking advantage of people. Like I had this clear vision, and at some point I said, I have to have something that makes this tangible and also makes me feel a little uncomfortable in taking a step, even though I had this safe day job. And so I hired a freelance designer. And I put some capital aside from my salary, and I was like, I'm going to have this exercise where I'm going to meet with this person 3 times a week, and I'm going to pay this person, and I'm going to start to vet these ideas. And to me, that was one of those first make it real steps that helped me kind of go down the slippery slope of taking the risk.
Yeah, I for some reason like that quote. I'm sure you've seen this of like Jeff Bezos when he was talking about starting Amazon. He was going for a walk with his the boss of D.E. Shaw. He's like, yeah, this is a great idea, but it'd be a better idea if you didn't have such an awesome job, right? And yeah, so like let's say you get this feedback and you reach conviction. I'm curious, like any advice you'd share with this group around like picking the right market to build in, and specifically, I'm interested in this tension between the craziest, stupidest ideas tend to be like the most interesting and the biggest. And so there's always a tension between like being too analytical, where you end up coming up with kind of a obvious idea, versus putting in the right amount of analysis to make, balancing this creativity with kind of just typical research.
Well, I always like to think that if everyone thinks you're crazy, you're either crazy or you're really onto something.
Exactly.
Right. And I think you want to take others' doubts, and you want to get to a point where you have so much conviction that in some weird way you start to gain confidence from the doubt that you get. And because of course, like nothing extraordinary is ever achieved through ordinary means, right? So the fact that other people are doubting you should tell you that you're onto something that at least other people are not all circling around. That could also mean it's a bad idea though still, right? So so I think that when you're thinking about the market, first of all, the biggest mistake that I see made in founders I really respect is that they are motivated by their passion for the solution as opposed to their empathy with the person suffering the problem. And then they do all this amazing work, And then a year or two later, they realize that they're 30 degrees off of product market fit. And they're like, shit, how did I get here? And it's because they had this like true North Star in their brain, but what they overlooked was actually the enterprise customer is more worried about just getting credit from their boss for doing certain things. And they didn't use your tool because it wasn't clear that they were doing the work. Or there's a consumer who actually didn't use the product because they need ego analytics and gratification to get through the top of the funnel. They just, in the first 30 seconds, they're lazy, vain, and selfish, and they don't have any care about your ultimate value proposition. They just want to feel good about themselves, and so you never got people successfully through the funnel. It's like always things like that are insights from empathy as opposed to your own passion for the solution that you see in your mind's eye. And so I think that when you're going about this journey, anchoring yourself with customers is like the ultimate hack. Now it seems obvious, but it's actually hard to do because a lot of people are like, "Why are you sitting next to me just watching what I'm doing?" I think you have to make time for that, and then you have to just be obsessed with this problem. Now, of course, if you're solving your own problem, that's a bit of a hack because you're your customer zero, and it's easier to have empathy with yourself.
And how do you operationalize that? I know you've talked about the few focus groups you did when you were starting Behance. Like, okay, you spend time with customers, but how do you spend time valuably with customers? Like, how do you actually ask the right questions?
Well, I think that, and by the way, I remember talking about the example of non-obvious ideas. Uber was a non-obvious idea. The delivery market was a very small market. The way that Uber was initially rolled out, it was unclear how this would ever be a marketplace. There were a lot of aspects. The one thing that I thought was interesting with that was everyone loved this idea of someday having a personal driver. Like, if I really make it in life, I'll have a driver. And so this idea of
how did you get here today, Scott?
Yeah, right. You gotta I had a Uber. But I think that it was actually Garrett wanting to feel this sort of baller vibe of having his own driver that sort of spawned the idea of Uber to begin with. But that wasn't your question. Your question was
how do you actually spend time with customers in a valuable way? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So focus groups. I hate focus groups because you're ultimately testing for familiarity. So whenever you go to customers and you're like, "What do you think of this?" Let me tell you what's going to happen. If they're familiar with what you're showing them, they're going to like it because they feel safe and it's familiar. If it's jarring and different, they're not going to like it because it's different. So you're testing for familiarity, which is valid. If you're trying to develop a user interface that people will know how to use, you should test it because you'll determine whether it's familiar enough. But when you're testing a product or a solution that doesn't really isn't familiar, you're going to get really skewed data. So we had a focus group in 2007 for Behance, and we got a bunch of creative professionals in a room. We gave them some free wine, cheap wine, and we got them together, and we were like, "Listen, we want to build a social network for creative professionals." And universally, everyone went around telling us how stupid that was. I already have MySpace, I already have DeviantArt, I already have LinkedIn, I already have my own portfolio, which is always out of date on my website. Why do I need a fifth place to do this? That's the worst idea. And so we were like, oh, okay. So, well, let's just, for the rest of this time together, just tell us what you're struggling with. And there were so many struggles that were shared. People felt like they never got attribution for their work. My agency was always taking the credit. They never got paid enough. Their headhunters took 30% of every dollar. Their website was always out of date, and they didn't care to update it because they only got 3 or 4 visits a month, and it was probably their mom. So they just didn't care. And that was the state of play in the creative world. And so we were like, great. So this is one of those examples where the customer doesn't know what they need. We're trying to deconstruct the portfolio that lived in this standalone website no one would ever find into a series of projects that permeate a system that are all searchable with all the metadata of what client and what agency and what brand and all this stuff. And then people will get lead gen from their projects to their portfolio, which is just a collection of projects. And so we were like, great, thanks for your feedback. And that's what we built. So when you are doing this customer research and focus groups stuff, first of all, know that you're optimizing, whether you're testing for familiarity or you're actually trying to gain empathy. Certainly, identify that for yourself up front to make sure you know what to do with what you get.
Yeah. And I don't remember if you had a co-founder with Behance, but I'm curious, through that experience and also just as an investor, What have you learned in terms of like magical co-founder pairs, and any advice you've seen work in terms of defining what you're looking for, actually going through that process of testing compatibility, and taking the leap of partnering with someone?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is dating, right? I mean, it's really about chemistry, and it's about values and how you complement one another. The person who helped me make it real for Behance as a freelance designer was a guy from Spain named Matthias Correa. And Matthias and I worked together. He was a freelancer for me. It was just me at the time. And then we started to build a team, got an engineer to help us explore some prototypes that actually worked. And then, after a year or so, I was like, this Behance being is as much your DNA as it is mine. And I mean, you're a co-founder. Like, you were there from the beginning. And so he became a co-founder. But what helped me get there was certainly the chemistry, right? And just how we were complete opposites as people. But we had really good complementary skill sets. So when I've seen other co-founders, go on these dating experiences, oftentimes they'll spend a lot of time together. They'll brainstorm. They will try to disagree with one another and see how they resolve it. They will, in some examples I've seen, they'll literally say, okay, of all the functions of a company, these are the ones that I'm strongest in, and these are the ones that I'm weakest in. How about you? And then you have a conversation about how those two things work. And I also think that the responsibility grid is an interesting way of thinking about it. And what the responsibility grid basically does is it breaks out which decisions in a company two co-founders must make together, which decisions in a company either one could make, and it just doesn't matter. And so it's just like efficiency, like don't even tell me or I won't tell you. And then which ones only one can make. If it's a product decision, I need to be the one who makes that. And if it's a this decision, you need to be the one who makes that. And if you can have that alignment up front, which I highly suggest, then it's smooth sailing.
Yeah, I like that framework. Moving on to kind of initial product building, right? Both as like a pre-seed and seed stage company, when you're in this first 2 years of finding product market fit. One topic I'd love your take on is this concept of hedging, right? Because I think as an early stage company, you're fighting for your survival. So there's a natural tendency to keep option value open in your business strategy and in your product strategy. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, this has been a lot of drama for me over the years on the hedging front, and a lot of debate in the entrepreneurial world. Are great entrepreneurs really great hedgers, or are they all in bet the bounty on every decision type of people? And I'm sure you'll get different answers for this. My view is that actually I think managing risk is a huge part of entrepreneurship, and you also and so here's how it was manifested in my own experience. We tried too many things in the beginning for Behance. The original version of Behance had not only the portfolios and the projects, but this thing called tip exchange and this thing called groups, where people could collect in groups, and a number of other features as well. And we also had a task management tool. We had a paper product line. We had a bunch of things because I was kind of concerned. I didn't know what was going to work, and I felt so responsible to help us figure this out and to pay the bills. And then as time went on, some gained more traction than others. And the hardest decisions were to actually kill things. But I became fond of that sort of metaphor of the bonsai, and how when you kill the most beautiful little branches, the bonsai actually takes better shape and this trunk gets stronger. And whenever we would have these debates, we'd kill something, we'd actually learn that we actually did get stronger. So we ended up killing groups and tip exchange and a bunch of other things in Behance, the work in progress feature. And every time we killed something, people created more projects and people viewed more projects. It's oh, so that's the core metric and that's growing. Let's kill another thing, and then boom, more. And people are always angry for a little bit, but then more engagement happens on the things that matter most. And so I guess the question is, what did I learn from that? Did I learn that we should not have done those things? Or did I learn that you should do those things because you don't know what will work? You just have to kill things really quickly. I'm on the latter. I think that's the latter, but some entrepreneurs will tell you focus on one thing and put everything, all the chips in one thing. And maybe those folks, if they get it right, succeed more quickly.
Yeah. So you like keeping option value open given a thesis, but then cut ruthlessly when there's a clear signal of what matters.
I think that's right. And I think when you do it enough, you actually start to feel comfortable with the culling. Yeah. But initially, it's really hard because you're I'm killing something that's actually working.
Yeah. Moving on to one of the final topics, getting into maybe brainstorming or getting your take of like where are the startup opportunities right now. I just did a debate with our mutual friend Sam Lesson, who like loves to publicly talk about how there's no startup opportunities for AI, right? And it's all going to be sucked up by the incumbents. And Scott's doing an amazing job at Adobe of playing that hand really well for Adobe. But the question is, from your perspective, you see both. What are the angles where you think like massive companies can be built, with AI as an enabler?
Yeah. Well, it's the $1 billion. How big was your last fund? Question these
just
days,
raised $1
right?
billion,
Yeah. So no, this is the critical question. So first of all, I think that there are tremendous there are a lot of workflows that are still really annoying and repetitive in daily life or in government and in the enterprise that have yet to be solved with any software.
Right.
And attacking them with an AI-first approach is going to be a tremendous opportunity. So there are things like that. I think the incumbents will own the LLMs. Mm-hmm. I don't think there will be dozens.
OpenAI was a startup, which is interesting.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and they were first. Mm-hmm. I also wonder like who's going to be the prodigy and CompuServe of the AI era. I wonder if some of the companies that we talk about and sensationalize right now, much like we did with Prodigy, CompuServe back in the day, are doing something in a way that was the first best way to do it, but maybe not the most dynamic and widely adopted way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what those will be. I'm just saying, like, I think the jury's still out. I do believe that how all this is going to unfold, right, is that they're going to be these multimodal LLMs. They're going to be, there's going to be the realization that we actually don't need the most powerful LLMs for everything. Mm-hmm. And actually, a lot of these can be local operations. And so that's a lot cheaper than the cloud. And so you're going to start having technology decide whether to route something locally or to the cloud, depending on what the task is. And then there's also the specialty models. So we're focusing on specialty models as it relates to creativity. Mm-hmm. We're spending a fortune on building these models, right? And we believe that those models should then flow through lots of products. We're launching an API business around that and everything else. And I think that a lot of healthcare and others will do that. And so I think competing with building models, you have to have either a data or a tremendous distribution advantage to succeed, in my opinion. However, I think that the standard things that have always worked for startups, things like network effects and things like transformational interfaces, still apply.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I'm fascinated as to what new marketplaces or networks can be unlocked with AI, just because it drastically reduces the friction to potentially onboard supply and demand. And I also think, I'm curious to get your take, but I feel like there's a version of an AI marketplace that looks very different than going to a website and having a bunch of searches and filters. It maybe looks like a bunch of different personal assistants that on the background connect the network.
I mean, we're going to be living in this assistant world, right? Where everywhere we go, there's an assisted agent-empowered experience. Every brand, maybe every kitchen device, like who knows, right? And questions I have in my mind are, number one, how will these agents know who we are? And if we have like personal preferences, how will they give us a personalized experience? We're going to expect that. I think it's actually crazy that to this day, when we go to an e-commerce website, it doesn't know our shoe size, it doesn't know our gender, it doesn't welcome us by name. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And I feel like one of my like litmus tests for a great technology is that it brings us back to the way things once were, but with more scale and efficiency. Back to the way things were that we long for, when every room looked like this, by the way. It was like the old days where the butcher knew your favorite cut, and and the person who you buy your shoes from like asks you if you want a new pair of that one you bought 2 years ago. Like everyone liked being known and remembered, and now we're in this world where we're all anonymous, and the only way we're known is if there's like ad tech sniffing our information and like trying to trick us and whatever. So I think that this agent-assisted world allows us to feel known again. The question is, how will we be known on our own terms? How are these agents going to work? What are the interfaces going to look like? There's so many startup opportunities in there.
I totally agree. It's funny, when we first launched the first version of the Messenger bot platform at Facebook, I was running product there. The like hero use case that was this woman who sold like homemade challahs every Friday to people at Facebook, and you would order over just a message thread. And we're like, now we can automate this. And it was exactly the same narrative that you had, which is like, there was a time when you could just message like the local baker, and they would say, and now we can potentially do that at scale. The other interesting thing around like all these agents communicating with each other is like, how are they going to pay each other? I think that's going to be a really interesting problem to solve.
I think so. I think so too. So there's just a long list of things, but just stay out of the obvious. I think that if there's like certain edges, the innovation is all about like finding edges that may someday become the center. And the question is like, how do you find an edge that will become the center? Well, you won't know, but what you will do is become super fascinated and obsessed with some edge. And then as you socialize yourself with that edge and asking people for feedback and prototyping and debating and whatever, that edge will either become more strange or more interesting. And then that's where you're in the magic zone. When you become obsessed and actually quite familiar with an edge that no one else really gets yet, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, I love your framework of when people give you doubt and that increases your conviction, that's when you know you're onto something.
I agree.
Maybe we'll leave it on this last topic, which is around perseverance, right? Obviously, like we all highlight the success cases of entrepreneurship, but when you're actually in the weeds, you quit your job, you're going through a downturn where it's more difficult to fundraise. Like, how do you like structure your life or your own kind of personality to make it through those kind of dark times as an entrepreneur?
Well, this was so I wrote this book called The Messy Middle. And I had this debate with the publisher because they said that's the worst title for a book. Like, no one buys books about things that are negative. People want to buy books with positive titles. But I was sort of saying, like, this is what the journey's like. It's just freaking messy. And a lot of it is about how to work amidst anonymity, ambiguity, uncertainty, and anxiety at all times as a builder. Like, that's what you're kind of dealing with. No one really cares about what you're building yet. No one really gets it. And it's a really lonely place. And especially when you're having a team on board with you. The metaphor I use is that you're driving this car with all these team members in the back seat with the windows blacked out. And they will go stir crazy unless you merchandise the progress you're making to them such that they can stay sane enough. And I do believe that the secret competitive advantage in all of your businesses is sticking together long enough to figure it out. We're hardwired as humans. The life expectancy 150 years ago was like 25 years old. So we're not programmed to spend 5 years of our life on something. We're programmed for short-term rewards. And so you have to kind of hack that system to get people to stick together long enough to figure it out. So part of that is the merchandising and the narrative, helping explain the progress that you're making. Part of it is the games that you play. The story I love to tell is that when we were starting Behance back in 2006, 2007, and you typed in Behance into Google, you always got, do you mean enhance? Do you mean enhance? And so one of the first goals that we had on our team before revenue or members or anything else was really a reasonable KPI to aspire for, was just to no longer be a mistake. And so we were like, if we get enough profiles linked back to blogs in the art and design community, through the magic of SEO, Google will deem that Behance is a legitimate search result. And then in October of 2007, like someone typed in our office Behance, and it was like this major celebration.
That was the day you were validated.
Where Behance was, and I kid you not, Beyonce became super popular 4 months later, and we lost it all over again.
Damn.
But it's this is.
I wonder if she knows how big of an impact she had on Behance.
I know, but now we're both legit. It's okay. But I think that these are the sort of games and hacks you have to play to hardwire your team's reward system, to merchandise and progress begets progress, and to drive the to drive the progress forward.
Yeah, awesome. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great.